Welcome to the Power Trends podcast, produced by the New York Independent System Operator, where we discuss energy planning, public policy, and other issues affecting New York's power grid.
Hello and welcome to the Power Trends podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lanahan, Vice President, External Affairs, Corporate Communications at the New York Independent System Operator. And for this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different, something I'm really excited about. We do have a NYISO employee with us. We've had many over the years now. It's incredible to think that we've been doing this for a few years, but a special guest, Michelle Merlis, who is an economist in market mitigation. I have that part right?
Yes, you do.
Working for Sean Johnson, ultimately. And we've had Sean on the podcast before. He described what market mitigation does, how important it is to the markets and market participants in the New York ISO. And we do want to hear a little bit about your professional background, about what you do here. But really what we want to talk about is special distinction of hosting Michelle Merlis, who qualified and made the U.S. national trail running team and competed in the World Championship event in Thailand in 2022. Remind us, what month was that?
It was in November, right at the beginning.
Okay. So before we get to the journey that you took from beginning running, because you weren't always a runner, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. To qualifying for the U.S. team and then going to Thailand. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you went to school. You're an economist. I read that you also specifically have a degree in agricultural economics. Went to Purdue?
Yep.
Okay. So give us a little bit of your background and then tell us a little bit about what you do at the NYISO in market mitigation. And then we're going to get to the good stuff.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Well, thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, I have a degree in economics. I went to undergrad in kind of central New York at Elmira College. I did my master's at Purdue in agricultural economics. And I spent some time in a PhD program at the University of Minnesota, but did not actually complete that PhD. However, had some really great experiences, and it actually was kind of foundational to the fun part of this conversation, which is about running.
But you're sort of local from the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, so I grew up in New Paltz, in the New Paltz area where the Gunks are, if anyone's familiar with that. And that's where my parents still live. So it's nice I get to go down there and visit them every once in a while. And my dad is actually from this area as well. So I have some family in the Albany area. It's always been very familiar. And I landed myself here after graduate school at Purdue.
Okay, great. So very quickly, what are you doing in market mitigation these days? What are you working on?
Right. So I am an economist in market mitigation, and I'm really happy that Sean came on and described exactly what our group does in a very succinct manner.
He did a great job.
Yeah, anyone can go and listen to that for the in-depth details about our entire group. I specifically spend a lot of time reviewing the energy markets. So one of my main job responsibilities is that I give a presentation every week to a host of different groups at the NYISO and really go into detail about pricing outcomes and what was actually happening in the markets. So that's a lot of my time reviewing a lot of data. And then I spend some other time on like ad hoc analyses or answering questions from various groups. That could be external groups or internal groups related to, what's happening in the energy market.
So we'll have you back on for a second episode where you could talk all about those things. Where Sean stayed up here, we'll go a little bit deeper with you.
Sounds good.
So very quickly, you grew up in New Paltz, a lot of hiking there. So it sounds like you kind of grew up hiking and exploring that part of the state has a lot of elevation and a lot of interesting terrain to climb and hike. But did it ever occur to you growing up in the New Paltz area at that time that trail running was a thing?
No, I had no idea. I did not know that trail running was a thing until I was in graduate school. But growing up, like you said, in New Paltz, my parents live really close to Minnewaska and Mohawk, and we did spend a lot of time as kids hiking and just hiking. I mean, my parents weren't runners, so I don't even know that I knew that running was a sport until I got to high school and found out there's a track team and a cross-country team. But really, I was absorbed by basketball when I was growing up. So even if running was an option, I was just so in love with playing basketball that I don't know that I would have done it much more than I did.
Always an athlete.
Yeah, always an athlete. I started off by dancing, And then when I was in maybe 3rd or 4th grade, my parents told me that I had to choose between basketball and dance. I really wanted to play basketball. It was the only sport at the school I went to, and all my friends played basketball. So I wanted to play, but they wouldn't let me do both. And I chose basketball, totally fell in love with it, and played that through college. In college, I played at the JV level. I did run 2 years of high school track, but I'm skeptical about how much I actually ran during that time. I think I was more just hanging out at the track with my friends.
So at what point do you take up running? And was it a quick transition over to trail running? Or were you, go out for a few miles, you fall in with a group and start to pick it up and then start to gain some distance? What was the transition like?
Yeah, what did that look like?
Yeah.
I guess I should mention that when I was in high school, even though running was as an organized sport wasn't what I was doing, I was always fast and I enjoyed the running. My high school basketball coach had asked me for feedback about what I thought could improve the program when I graduated. And I'm pretty sure if you were to find that document, it would say you should have your athletes run more.
Conditioning.
Conditioning. Yeah, I was all about the conditioning. But I really found running when I was in grad school. I kind of came to that point in my life where organized sports were finished and I was looking for a way to stay in shape, be active, and running was just such a natural pathway. And I had made some friends in my undergrad experience who they were already out of college and they all met each other through running at a local running group. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I guess I could start running and I'll try and find a local running group and maybe I'll make some friends. So that's what I did. I showed up to a group run in West Lafayette, Indiana, and I think I was 50 years younger than everybody there. So I ended up running mostly by myself for a while. And then my partner at the time, he wanted to run with me, but he was adamant that he would not run on the roads. And he said, I heard about this thing called trail running. And this was kind of the first time I realized there was a magazine called Trail Runner Magazine. And there were all these great stories about trail runners who like lived on motorcycles and camped across the country. And I just kind of had a very Jack Kerouac vibe to it. Okay. And that was appealing. The trail running scene in West Lafayette, Indiana is not fantastic, but
not
it worked.
A lot of elevation in Indiana.
No. We had one trail that ran along the river. I use the term trail lightly, but it, made me realize that being off of pavement was really enjoyable. And then when we ultimately moved to Albany, I found the Albany Running Exchange, and that's where I really started getting involved with trail running.
How long ago was it where you realized, I have a special talent for this?
That's a hard question because I think I'm still searching for that special talent sometimes. But I would say that the year 2017 was probably a fundamental year in the shift from, I do this for fun to, I think that I could do this more competitively. And I was really terrible at trail running when I first started. The first real trail race that I ran was the Seven Sisters Trail Race over in Western Mass. And it took me a really long time. It was only 12 miles long, but it took me at this point significantly longer than it takes me to run a marathon on the roads. And I just kind of thought, I want to be better at this. So I trained with, friends and went to group runs and was very casual about it. But then in 2017, I won a race called the Escarpment Trail Run. And that was a really big deal for me. That race has become very fundamental to who I am and the people that I'm connected to in this area. And I had run it a few years prior, and I was, my first year was just finish the race. The second year was let's improve upon the year prior.
I think most people that sign up for Escarpment for the first time, it's, I want to finish this.
Yeah,
so for our listeners, Escarpment's a one-way race through the Catskills. Talk about the elevation gain, the distance. Yeah. Give us some character on what that particular race is like.
Sure. So the Escarpment Trail Run is one of the most historic trail runs, especially on the East Coast. It's been around for almost 50 years. Dick Vincent, the race director, has been the race director for almost all those 50. I mean, he's race directed it every year.
He is the Escarpment.
Yes, he is the Escarpment. And it is a point-to-point 30K trail race in the Catskills that has 3 main peaks. So you hit Windham High Peak, Blackhead, and then Stopple Point. It's fairly technical and it has a good amount of elevation gain. It's not the most that you can find in the Catskills, but it's fairly brutal in the way that it runs, where you're deceived by how easy the first 5 or 6 miles are, and then it gets really hard in the middle. And if you can make it to halfway feeling good, you're probably in a good spot. But most people spend a lot of their energy making it to halfway, and then it's very challenging from there to the finish.
So you win this race, and we're talking about winning the race, right?
Yeah, I was the first female finisher. Yeah,
right. And then after escarpment, how much longer after that, how much time in between that and Devil's Path?
Oh, when I did the fastest known time?
Yeah.
3 years.
3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And it's Devil's Path, and then you run the qualifying race?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I did the Devil's Path in 2020. So COVID year, when all races were canceled, that became my project.
All right. Okay. So let's fast forward. So tell us now about, it's also in the Catskills, Devil's Path. And this is, I think, I want you to describe it, but it seems like it's a bit of a turning point that links to your qualification for the U.S. team. But tell us about Devil's Path and what that's like and what that experience was like. You're already starting to tell us it was during COVID, all races are canceled. So you're looking for a challenge. You're looking for something interesting to do because races aren't there.
Right. So the Devil's Path, again, is another iconic Catskill trail. I think somewhere on the internet it says it's the hardest and most dangerous trail in the U.S., which I don't believe that to be true, but it is extremely hard. It's about 24 miles and about 9,000 feet of elevation gain and pretty similar loss. Again, a point-to-point route. Yeah, and it goes over 5 peaks, 5 or 6. You kind of have 3 right at the beginning, and then this other one that's called Plateau, that's almost at the halfway point, and we get to the top of Plateau. Then you have this nice 2-mile flat stretch. It's the only flat section of the entire 24 miles. And then Westkill is going to be the last high peak that you'll hit on that route before you come down about 4.5 miles to the finish. And I've run the Devil's Path a few times just for fun. A lot of people
For fun.
Yeah, for fun. Trail runners are crazy. So we usually have a group that goes out once a year, and we'll do that as just like a fun group run. And I had done that, I think, twice at that point, and kind of always had it in my head, I'd like to go after a fast time on this route at some point. And there's this category of running called fastest known times, which is basically, it used to be sort of reserved for like really iconic trails like the Appalachian Trail, the John Muir Trail, Arizona Trail. It's definitely exploded a lot in its popularity, and there are so many more routes now. You can go onto the website, submit a route, run the fastest time on that route, and have an FKT.
And GPS technology advancing so dramatically over the last 10 years, and then the advent of Strava, where you can document your runs and for everyone to see. I mean, this has really, created a thing around fastest known times now because it's democratized it in many respects.
Yeah, it's become so much more accessible with the technology and even just the revolution of the website. It used to be this really kind of old school message board where people would post on there, oh, I ran this path in this time. Or they, most of the time people actually share, I'm planning to run this route and I'm going to go after the fastest time. So they kind of notify the person who had done it before them. But now it's this really user-friendly, high-tech website. You can just go on, submit your times, put your Strava link in there. And there's also a comment section. It's really easy to use. And it became really popular in 2020 when races got canceled and people were still looking for ways to challenge themselves.
So you wake up one day, you pick the day. I read it was September?
I did do the attempt in September, yeah.
And on the cooler side, those are good conditions, right? You don't want to overheat. It's all self-supported. So that means you're bringing all your nutrition with you and the bottles that you're going to need in order to fill up along the way, find places where you can. When you get to Plateau, did you say that's roughly halfway?
Yeah, actually, when you get to the top of Plateau, you're a little bit less than halfway, and you go across Plateau, and then you come down. And when you come down, this really steep, like 1,000 and 1,600 feet of loss. you hit Route 214, and that's really about the halfway point.
Okay.
So it's the only road crossing that you have is
So
Route 214.
When you get to plateau, are you really opening it up at that point? I mean, do you say to yourself, this is really where I can gain some time, or are you like more conservative?
I knew where I was at various intervals throughout the route. So prior to 2 weeks before my attempt, I kind of thought I had it in the bag. The FKT time was about 2 hours slower than what I thought I could run. And then 2 weeks before the day that I was planning to run it, someone who I'd never heard of before came out and ran the route in a blazing fast time. It was about 45 minutes faster than I thought I could run on my best day. And it's like, oh, this is going to be a really big challenge.
So you're making plans. You've identified that you're going to do this, and then somebody comes out of nowhere and posts a time that you thought was faster than what you could achieve.
Yes. Yeah. It was pretty shocking. My first thing is like, well, first I was notified because on Strava, which is this app where you can track your runs, and they have segments and you can compete with other people on the segments. And I got notifications like, Charlotte Winkler, she stole all your crowns. Like every CR that I'd had from this route was just gone. And I was like, who is Charlotte Winkler? And I was like, well, at this point, like I've already trained for this attempt. I didn't know who she was. She didn't know who I was. It wasn't, like we had coordinated. We're both going to try and go after this. And I didn't have any more time to train if I still wanted to do it on the day that I was planning. So I just tried to shift my mental focus and think, well, I'm going to try. But I knew all of her splits. So thanks to Strava, I could go on. I could see exactly what time she got to the base of this mountain, the peak of this mountain, and halfway. And I was like within a minute or two at basically every single checkpoint. And then the last one that I remember is at the base of West Hill. So before the last climb, I remember looking at my watch and saying, 3 minutes. But I couldn't remember if I was 3 minutes ahead or if I was 3 minutes behind. And so I thought, well, if I'm 3 minutes behind, I've got a lot of work to do. I've only got like 7 miles to go. So I worked really hard to the top of that climb, and I was really exhausted. I kind of thought, I'm going to miss it. It's going to be really close. But when I got to the top, it was like I was just in that flow state, right? So I hit that point of running where you sort of feel out of your own body and things are connecting, and you're just like, I felt like I was floating over the rocks. And that's kind of like the moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Like I'm going to get the time. It's going to be close, but I'm going to get it.
Does that flow state happen often? I mean, you've got to be in some kind of flow state, even on the more sundry runs and days, because of the kind of terrain you're going over that we mentioned before. But, and you mentioned running alone a lot. So what's that whole experience like?
Yeah, I think being able to relax your mind is what lends itself to relaxing your body and allows you to move through the mountains more confidently, smoothly. But I wouldn't say that flow state happens as much as you'd like it to.
Okay.
I think I try to really make sure that it's going to happen on race day or at an FKT. And that's like the ideal situation. I can live with a handful of runs that feel really choppy and hard, and I'm not really connecting on these downhills. Like it feels really rough. And it kind of seeds a lot of doubt about what might come on race day. But then you just like, if you can mentally get yourself to the point of, no, I've done the work, and yes, my body is ready, like recognize the accumulation of training and then the ability to perform at a higher level once you've given yourself a little bit of rest to adapt. That's the ultimate goal.
You achieved the fastest known time on this iconic route. Surprise even yourself with the level of performance. And then not long after that, take us to the day you qualified for the U.S. team. You were contemplating putting yourself in a position for that, though, right?
Yeah. So making Team USA has always been a goal. If you were to have asked me about that in high school, I would have told you I was going to be on Team USA for basketball. If you're listening to this, you don't know that I'm not that tall. So when I switched over to running, that was always a goal, make a U.S. team. And I didn't know when that would happen. I certainly didn't think it was going to happen last year. But 2020 was a good year for me in terms of running. I kind of thrived in the COVID environment of everything was just quieter. And as an introvert, that was really beneficial to me. 2021, I did a couple of races. I actually ran the Breakneck Trail Marathon, the half version. So there's 2 events that happen at this event. There's a half and there's a full. I did the half that year and a really good race at the half. Kind of can't remember what else I did in 2021, but it ended up being kind of a rough year. And at the end, I was thinking, I had a Boston qualifier. So I had some teammates who were planning to run Boston in 2022. And that's where I was leaning to. So my teammates and I decided we're going to train for Boston. We'll all train together over the winter. And it was great. We spent December, January, and most of February training together every weekend to run Boston in April of 2020.
These are Albany Running Exchange.
Yep.
Folks?
We have a local racing team. And yeah, there's a handful of us. So I was pretty set on Boston. And I did know that the Breakneck Point Trail Runs was going to be a selection race for the U.S. team. The marathon would be a selection race for the U.S. 40K team at the World Championships. I knew that, and I thought, well, I'm not going to make it. So I didn't really register initially that I should try and run the race. And then at some point, I just was like, wait, why am I not running in that race? I want to make Team USA. And there's a race kind of in my backyard that I already know, so not too far from the Catskills. And I just kind of thought, like, wait, I can go down there every weekend. I can train on the course. And even if I don't get a spot, at least I tried. And who knows who's going to show up? That's always, a big thing with racing is like your position is kind of irrelevant because all that matters is who shows up that day, right? So at the end of February, I decided I'm not running Boston anymore. I'm going to run Breakneck, which was at the point that I officially switched my mind. It was, I think, 6 weeks away. So I did away with my Boston training and I switched from training on the road to training on the trails. And I think the first weekend that I was able to get on the trails down there because of the snow was the 3rd weekend of March. And I went down for 5 weeks in a row. And I trained on the course each of those 5 weekends. So
by the time you show up, you know every turn, every ascent, every rock and route.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of my goals was, a little bit of like the controllables. And for me, knowing the course, I knew that would be a huge advantage because the trails there some of them are very well used and it's very easy to tell where you're going. Some of them are not so well used and you would look at the ground in front of you and think, I don't know where the trail actually is.
So again, you win that qualifier and you've made the team. What goes through your mind next?
Yeah. I think my immediate thought was, this isn't real. So it felt very unreal for quite a while. Actually, when I crossed the finish line, I headed immediately to go take a drug test. So I spent the next 2 hours with the officials, making sure everything was all set. And, the whole time I was thinking like, this isn't real. But then finally when I came around to it, okay, I'm actually going to be on Team USA. I had a lot of time. So I was myself and then the
race happens how many months after Breakneck?
So Breakneck was April 30th and Worlds were right at the beginning of November.
Okay.
So however many months in between.
Plenty of time to contemplate and train.
Yeah, plenty of time to contemplate. At that point, there were only a handful of us that knew we were going to be on the team. So the race that I ran was the first selection race. So there was myself and then Max King, the male who had won. And so I started thinking about training. What am I going to do to train? Now I'm on the team, and now I've got to live up to the expectations of running with and competing against the best trail runners in the world. How am I going to do that? Yeah.
And when we look at the team, the lineup, Colorado, Utah, Washington, saw somebody from Pennsylvania. And then there's Albany, New York.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm super proud of that because I don't live at high altitude. Yeah. Thanks. There were a handful of Northeast runners or East Coast runners on the team, but most of them, like you mentioned, were from Colorado or Utah, California, out west. And that's pretty standard. Most people, when they find success in trail running, they move out west. Yeah. The training is incredible.
And so you do some of that. You say, okay, I do have to relocate for a little while.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of my first thing was how can I get a good amount of time to go out west and train and not work? So I started scheming how I could possibly make that happen. And I was really fortunate that the NYISO gave me some unpaid leave to go out to, I went to Flagstaff, Arizona, and I trained there for 5 weeks at altitude on the trails every day.
There's a community out there, yeah?
There's a community out there, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what that culture's like. You're in amongst other, very competitive endurance athletes.
Exactly. There's a great running community in Albany, too. It's a different type of community. Out in Flagstaff, what is being part of that community like? It's like going to the gym and the 3 people training around you are Olympians. Yeah. That's what it's like. And it's pretty intimidating, but it's also very welcoming. There's a very talented pool of road and track runners in Flagstaff, but there's also a very talented pool of trail runners. And the trail runners are so open and welcome to people who have come there to train. And I found a group pretty much on my first night there. So that was really special and lucky.
Did training go well?
Training was incredible. Yeah. I definitely had the best training block of my life. It's not that many years to account for there, but everything was connecting. Once I adjusted to running at 8,000 to 10,000 feet every day, I had some really great workouts. I was just having a lot of fun.
How long did it take, do you think, to truly acclimate before you're like, okay, I'm used to 8,000 feet? And
I wish I could say that I did truly acclimate, but I think my last week that I was there, I did a run where I went up to 10,000 feet, and I thought, wow, am I still not acclimated to altitude? Okay. Yeah. But I think after 2 weeks, I was able to do workouts, and they were slower than what I would do at sea level, but I was able to work out without, the taste of blood in my mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so then there's all sorts of preparation. You're flying, 20 hours to get to where you're going to race on the world stage. Tell us about that experience. Walk us through what that was like before you actually, get to the race. And then what was the race day like?
Yeah, so race day, the race started fairly early, which is good because it was fairly warm and humid, as you might imagine, in Thailand. They had the 40K and the 80K start together, and we were the second day of races. So we kind of had seen the setup and knew what to expect, but it actually is pretty low key at the start, with the exception that they did do a gear check. So the first thing you do is, you take this kind of scary little red cart to the start from your hotel, which is kind of to me, it's one of the iconic elements of being in Thailand, is that the way that they would shuttle you in this, it's kind of like a taxi, except for it's the back of a pickup truck with 2 wooden slats and no seatbelts and no doors and no windows. And they're like, here you go. Good luck. So that's how you start your morning, getting to the race. And then we all had to do gear checks. So the 40K and the 80K, we had a set of required gear, which was
all supplied to you by sponsors? Gear?
So I had some of my gear from my personal sponsor, but some of it was a cell phone. So that you had to carry with you, which of course, no, I don't have a sponsored cell phone, but I bought a little mini cell phone that fits in the palm of my hand. And I can talk about that at one point, because the requirement was that you had a phone that turned on. They did not say if that phone had to work or not. But the idea was that if you ran into an emergency, you could call for help. I don't even know how you would do that in the middle of the jungle. I don't even know what the help number was, but I had the requirement to get through to the start line. And then they had other requirements too, like you had to have a bottle on you that would carry a certain amount, right? So they're making sure that you have hydration on you. They did also require that you had a rain jacket. This was a really like big point of confusion. You had to have a rain jacket that weighed a certain amount, and the amount that it had to weigh was particularly bulky for a place that was 95 degrees.
So this is a minimum weight?
Yes. Yeah, I forget exactly what.
Intuitively, you would want it to be a maximum rate because I don't want to bring all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we had to everybody had to kind of work to figure out, do we have the requirements and are we going to be able to get through? And, of course, we made sure we were going to meet those.
So you're running on a course you'd not been on before.
Yeah. So I saw about 3 miles of the course on Wednesday. So a couple of days before the race, I took one of those red carts an hour from our hotel up to the top of the mountain on this single lane dirt road with no shoulders and extremely steep. It was like, just don't look. It was really terrifying, but the run itself was very fun. It was like my first time meeting my teammates and a chance to see some of the course and to realize oh, this is actually quite a bit different than I thought it was going to be.
How would you describe the terrain? I mean, you said jungle earlier, but it's mountainous and...
Yeah. So the terrain, in terms of the technicality, it was not technical. So what would have been the least technical section of the Breakneck race where I qualified, I would consider the most technical section you saw on the Thailand course. It was a good mix of some single track trails that were fairly smooth, maybe a little washed out in places, but also a lot of old Jeep roads. And they weren't particularly well-maintained Jeep roads, but they were, not Catskill trails. The course itself was basically just 2 giant ascents of the mountain. So you went up 4,000 feet over 5 miles. You came down 4,000 feet over 5 miles, and then you repeated it. Not the same trail, but from a different spot in the mountains. And then there was another short up down at the end. Here we have much more of you go up 1,000 feet, you come down 1,000 feet. It's more rolling. So those sustained climbs where you're going to be climbing for an hour at a time, you just don't have that here. So that was pretty interesting. And there were some sections that were very runnable. And then there were some grades that were particularly steep, especially the second climb was I was kind of by myself at that point in the middle of, the jungle. I hadn't seen another person in a while. And I'm going up this grade where it's I have to use my hands to kind of hold on to the roots and pull myself up in some sections. And I'm thinking, well,
I hope the phone works.
No. Yeah, exactly. I hope my phone works if I need it. And then I realized I probably wasn't going to, but I didn't need it. So that's good.
So what's next? Maybe to qualify again? Is that in your mind?
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe you might want to go back and try and do better than Thailand. I don't know where the next one is being held, but...
Yeah, so the next championships are this year in Austria at the beginning of June.
Yeah.
Which is pretty exciting.
They like their endurance athletes and sports out there.
Yes, they do.
Oh, man.
The Europeans found themselves on a lot of podiums at the 2020.
The Germans, the Austrians, they typically dominate.
Yep. So I think there'll be a lot of really good competition at the 23 championships. I think that last year there was also a lot of attention on the championships. And so we'll find more people interested in making their country's team. Hopefully more countries are interested in bringing teams. And yes, I am hoping that I will qualify again. Breakneck is a qualifier again this year.
Yep.
And it's the top 2 spots get to go. And then there's another race where there's 2 more spots, and then there's a resume selection spot. I can tell you that from seeing the entrant list, the competition is very steep, which is really exciting. The goal is to send the best teams to the World Championships, and we're going to get that by having the best people show up to these races. Right. So yeah, I just know from the local competition to the woman I was training out with Flagstaff, she's going to come run the race. So I know what my competition looks like, and it's intimidating, but I'm going to give it a try and see what happens.
What's the date?
It's May 6th this year. May 6th. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll be rooting for you just like we did the last time. And it's been a joy going over all this, and we'll have you back and learn what the second national or global championships were like.
Oh gosh, that's a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make it there.
You will.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on and talking about my favorite thing.
It's our pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, the New York Independent System Operator, NYISO for short, is responsible for reliably managing New York's power grid and energy markets and providing independent data to policymakers and the public. For more independent info, please visit the NYISO blog at www.nyiso.com/blog.